On this week's show, discussing R&D in construction with Stephen Poppe from Hitt Contracting. In this week's news, labor shortages, AI chatbot, theater backgrounds, and more. All right, here we are. Ariel Castillo off the road, the BIM nomad here in person. What's happening, man?
Been a great start of the year, and I'm really happy to spend more time with you, man.
Yeah, it'll be great. Get in and out here, recording, getting you. But you got to have those experiences out on the road, right? To really enjoy yourself.
Yep.
Anything fabulous in your travels? What was your highlight?
Well, Mexico has been having a lot of events lately, so I've been going there a little bit, and also Costa Rica. I got a company that was really interested in having an in-house BIM training. You just have to feel happy about where the industry's heading in, everywhere else, not only in the US, but worldwide.
Yeah, you do. And bringing that in-house training in, bringing that BIM in it's great to see them doing that. So we have a special guest this morning. Stephen, how are you, man?
Hey, Jeff. I'm doing well. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, if anybody's watching on YouTube, I'm going to call this a dog episode because Ariel has one behind him. Steven's got one poking up on him. These are the lives. Hey, we're in your living room, right?
This is the special guest. Yeah.
Yeah, the true special guests are the dogs of the crew, right? I don't have one here, but I live vicariously through you guys. So that's awesome, man. That's it's this new world, right? We're in each other's living rooms. It's kind of the cool part of what we do. So, hey, we're going to be back with Stephen in a minute. It's going to be awesome. Before we jump into the episode, a little pause for the cause.
It's important everyone supports a culture of well-being in the field and is equipped with the tools to help prevent suicide in construction. Procore Safety Qualified courses were built in partnership with our customers, elevating enhancements to their standard OSHA training. And the Bringing the Right Mindset series equips individuals and leaders alike with the skills necessary to really build resilient teams. We've made these 3 courses available for free and on demand, and they're offered both in English as well as Spanish, and they are CEU certifiable. Procore.com/certified-qualified is where we host our Procore's learning portal, and anyone can use their Procore credentials or create a free account to get started.
Remember, we're back on YouTube. Check out youtube.com/@the ConTech Crew. Smash that subscribe button. We need you to get episodes every week. I'm here with Robert Scheer, VP of Strategy and Business Development for OpenSpace. Robert, tell us a little bit about what is OpenSpace.
OpenSpace is a 360 job site capture, review, and tracking tool. Think of it as an up-to-the-minute Google Street View of your project that people can view anywhere, anytime. Some people also refer to it as like total project recall, right? So what if you could have a photographic memory for all your projects for all time in case something came up in the future? So that's really what it is. How do you use it? Let me grab my camera. You simply just attach a 360 camera to your hard hat, open our app on your phone, open the floor plan, tap where you are and walk. We take care of the rest. So as you walk, we take 2 360 images per second. You come back, upload them to the cloud, and we process that all together, stitch them together, pin all those images to your plans, and deliver it back to you as the navigable 360 environment for everyone to use and share. And typically, we deliver it back to you in like 30 to 60 minutes.
And we're back. All right. So, Stephen, let's dive in. I love this title, Research and Development Manager for Hitt Contracting. So, tell us a little bit about, the background of how you got here. People can check in and look at your bio and whatnot, but I think it's pretty interesting that you've had a pretty full circle of your experiences.
Yeah, I can't say I would have predicted this is where I would have ended up. In terms of industries, I think I was a business econ grad coming out of college, and I really thought finance, whatever that really meant, was my future, and really kind of a short stint in banking pretty quickly kind of changed my mind that was not my future. And so I pivoted to kind of the other end of the spectrum in terms of kind of tangible careers, and ended up at RQ Construction out in California, working on mainly DoD projects. And that's where I cut my teeth. And I think what I fell in love with was just the tangibility of construction, but also just the way in which there were a lot of innovative people solving really hard problems every day quietly. And I think, along the way, I learned a lot just by listening. I was the youngest of four and three older sisters, so I was kind of forced to learn the power of listening early. And through that kind of process, I was able to kind of pick up on what I saw, some things that did and didn't work kind of at the project level. And I think what I went into construction thinking was really a McKinsey article kind of narrative on the problems in construction, which was tech adoption and some knuckle dragging aspects of just people not innovating. And that's really not what I saw. And what I saw was really there was an issue with the right kind of technology wasn't being built for the kinds of projects and for the kinds of construction that we had and that I was interacting with. And so I think from there, I became more and more interested with the role that technology generally could play in helping kind of drive efficiencies. And I think through that early kind of career, it led me to pursue a lot of different angles to my career that kind of responded to that thesis, whether it be joining the startup land to really understand how products are built and understand how other industries are adopting technology and using them to drive efficiencies. And then ultimately ending up at Hitt, which is really looking at technology through a more holistic lens in terms of people, process, and tech, and how do we orient the business model of a GC to really respond to the future of construction. So it's been an interesting ride, but I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on when I saw that jump from Versatile over to Hitt, and I knew your background from before that. We'd crossed paths, so I was very interested because to me, coming from where I came from before this, that's the sign of a mature industry, right? Is where you are free to move about the life cycle and understand, and they're seen as together, not separate. And I think you're right. Like your early stage, you noticed that the technology and construction weren't connected and weren't understanding one another. So I'm interested in maybe some of the things you learned, especially for people who are balancing that or who are frankly against it, right? There's a lot of folks out there against it. My favorite is, I'm on the tech side of things now, and it's like, well, don't take our people. But then as soon as you sit down with them, they're like, how many people do you have from the industry that are telling? And it's like, wait, I can't not do that. This is. So tell me a little bit about maybe what you learned when you made that jump into technology that has helped you with this next step so people can understand what this circle of life, in my opinion, and maturity looks like.
Yeah, I think what I saw early, and I joined a kind of a data as a service company called Label Insight out of Chicago. And the problem it was really solving was the problem of data. If you think of kind of retail and CPG, if you're talking Pepsi, Target, Walmart, they 5+ years ago had a data problem where a lot of the products that they were selling, the data was coming in kind of disparate forms. And so what Label Insight solved for was the digitization, extraction of that data off the package label and the organization of that data into a product that could be leveraged within a lot of different platforms. And I think what I learned there was just the quantity of domain expertise that was often informing our end product, right? I think every startup kind of comes into market with an idea, but then ultimately understanding the target that you're trying to serve from a customer standpoint, along with understanding those problems deeply, then informs your end product. And so there was a domain expertise within Label Insight and with the folks that we were talking with that I didn't always see on the construction side, right? And I think that has started to be addressed in a few different ways. But I think that's a gap that we increasingly need to close. And it kind of responds to kind of the intro story of me and why I've made these jumps is I think I want to respond to providing kind of the other perspective in all of these different forums.
Yeah. So bringing that domain knowledge each direction, now sitting at Hitt, you have an opportunity to work with companies that want to work with Hitt to help guide them, help bring that knowledge back. But guaranteed working a mile, walking a mile in the technology shoes, I bet your approach is a little bit different than maybe some that haven't walked in the shoes of both sides. I'm one as well. I was with a masonry contractor for 3 years. Like, I know what that side looks like. It's a critical path.
Yeah, and Steve, something I want to know is, making that transition between one industry and the other. How do you see the differences in skills, and how did you migrate your skills, or what did you need to, change or adapt?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the benefits of kind of becoming an informally trained project manager for a commercial contractor is you grow a pretty diverse set of skills, right? And I think with that kind of, and you need a kind of a base raw skill set to really adapt and work in that environment. But once you have that, it can be deployed in a lot of different ways. And I think for me, the common thread that I saw between the two was I became really good at listening, and on the PM side, that really helped me understand what our owner was attempting to want to drive from an outcome standpoint. And then also working with contractors and thinking through kind of win-win scenarios for all. And I think on the software side of that, it then became customer focused, right? And so I was originally a customer success project manager. And so that was a really direct tie-in. But ultimately, it became more holistically around, okay, once I learned customer success, we just truly just attempting to align these are the desired outcomes of my customer, and these are kind of the value prop of our solution, and trying to line those up. And so I think ultimately I kind of stumbled into realizing that there were a lot more tie-ins than maybe I originally thought.
Interesting. No, I love that, especially because that client-facing approach, it's something that I think as an industry we are evolving and seeing it a little bit different, understanding that it's not only our needs, it's also putting the client, looking out for the client. So what do you think about that, Jeff?
Well, I mean, we had Adam McKercher on recently, and that was his focus, right? It was that the WIFM, what's in it for me, for the people. It was that customer success, that customer support, which is critical to the path of adoption. My thought, I'm wondering now that you're over and you're doing research and development. So you're not focused on today, right? You're focused on the future. How do you take that same set of skills you have now, but how do you articulate that into kind of a future roadmap for Hitt?
Yeah, I think maybe a couple of thoughts. One is, I think going back to the previous conversation, I think looking at even the role of a general contractor and today, I think the ones that differentiate themselves are the ones that are able to kind of look at this through the lens of an experience. And Whiting Turner did that, and Hitt focuses on that a lot, right? And it's not just the experience of the owner, but it's also the experience of their people. And I think that kind of differentiation is what kind of separates the really large GCs who are going to continue to do really well. And so then I think when you look at that as a value prop of a business, from my lens, I start to think about how do you capture and productize that? Because I kind of have a product brain at this point a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so in looking at 5-10 years out, the role of a GC now is what we know is going to be very different in 5-10 years. Or it could be similar in ways we can't predict. And so when I look at the role of R&D, and we have a really good leader in Megan Lance, who's the VP of R&D at Hitt, and she's provided a really good vision of kind of a lot of different ways. And there's a lot of initiatives within that category of R&D, and they all look at something different, whether it be remote enablement of a superintendent so that we can potentially extend the life of our superintendents, or if it's looking at new materials for exterior skins. There's a lot of different ways in which we analyze the problem. But I think one holistic kind of organizing thought is if the real IP of Hitt is the experience we're able to produce for our people and our customers, that provides some really singular kind of aligning vision around what you invest in. And so that's one of the ways, but I think a specific thread for me is thinking through, again, productizing the Hitt experience so that our customers and our people can more consistently kind of have that experience.
I'm really into that because it is the future is the experience economy, right? If you're and we see this way too much. There's far too many contractors that are comfortable in their moment right now. And yeah, it's fine now, but you're headed for a cliff. And Stephen, you're right. We don't know what the future will look like. I will tell you it will look far different. It will probably rhyme pretty close to a lot of things we have going now, but in enough different ways that it's going to challenge them. And I love that because like if you sit back and listen to the things we talked about on stage in the past, it's like that Kodak moment, right? If Kodak had realized they were in the business of capturing memories, then they wouldn't have been stuck on film. They'd probably still be here today, and we wouldn't talk about Instagram. We'd talk about Kodakgram or whatever it might be. But instead, we talk about Instagram. And I think you're applying that lens to Hitt of like, hey, Hitt Construction is about the experience of building a project or delivering an experience to your customers. I wonder what's holding the industry back and what you see holding us back, whether it be, kind of the things I talked about when it comes to a mindset, or are there technology things that are holding us back as well?
Yeah, I think the Kodak analogy is really powerful, right? I think that there is some risk though, and I think some of the risk that I see is GCs starting to look at how they respond to the future without really understanding their core competency, right? And I think you get to this when you start talking about whether or not you want to develop net new products or whether you're really getting away from really construction in general. And so I think Hitt is aligning ourselves around a vision where we deeply understand our core competencies. So I think that's kind of the foundation that you need to think through. But also on the other side of your question, I think is there's some root causes that I don't think we're spending enough time thinking about of what's keeping us from tech adoption and innovation and kind of evolving. And in my mind, I think it's low trust environments on these job sites, right? Whether it be the commercial contract or whether it be employment structures, I think we need to have an honest conversation around how we create the right ecosystem environment so that people take risks and try new things and are willing to fail in ways that respond to a common success language that we're aligned to.
Ariel, I'm interested in your thoughts there and questions because you are, at Miller Davis, you're in the throes of this as well.
Well, I want to stay in the R&D, but I want to switch it over a little bit into, let's say, smaller and medium-sized companies that don't necessarily, they're not necessarily invested in tech, and now they're starting to get there, and now you have to bring the R&D, which is gonna, it's kind of like for them blowing money in a way. It's like burning cash. How will you sit down with a company that doesn't do R&D, and how will you convince them that this is something that they should put resources into?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different arguments. I mean, one, I think you do have to have the right culture for it. I think a company that tries to invest in R&D without a culture of innovation and without a culture of evolving, it's not going to solve a problem, yes. Right? You really can't throw money at this and solve it that way. But I think assuming that ingredient is there, I think there's a couple ways to do there's probably more than a couple, but there's a few different ways of doing R&D, right? I think one common way is really R&D function looking at your core competency and seeing how you evolve it. And then maybe another lever is if we're talking evolution against core competency, are we talking 1 to 3 or are we talking 5 to 10 years out? And the way in which you answer that question is ultimately going to really dictate the success language you create around your R&D function. And so I think as you start to answer those questions, you then start to see, okay, well, how is R&D different than project solutions or my innovation team? And I think ultimately, I think there's an argument to be made that project solutions and innovation is R&D just at a different timetable, right? Whether it's 6 to 12 months out or 6 to 18 months out versus 3 to 5 to 10 years out. And so I think once you have some of those questions figured out and aligned around your company vision, then you can look at investment. But I think ahead of that, I think you risk throwing money at a problem that you truly don't really understand what you're potentially solving for.
Yeah, you can efficiently get to a bad ends if you're really not paying attention to where you're headed, right? And that's the
Right.
classic.
I think even you look at some ways in which I think the GCs are investing in R&D is through M&A, right? And whether it be, buying companies or investing in different startups, there's a lot of different ways you can do that, but ultimately it has to have a common thread back to what are you trying to solve for? And I think I have seen that not be alignment there and the issues that it causes.
No, there's a lot of contractors out there where those things are not aligned to one another, and they are literally throwing good money at bad, and continuing to crawl down. They don't realize it. I think you brought something interesting up, Stephen, that we didn't really prep or talk about ahead of time, but the mergers and acquisition markets is a real thing, right? Like, it's also another sign, like the sign of you going from construction to tech and back to construction is a sign of maturity. M&A is a sign of maturity as well. There's this false narrative in our industry that acquisition of a customer, of a technology company, or acquisition of a construction company of some sort is a bad thing. And it's actually not. Like, 90% of all technology startups and eventual wins are not IPO. There's some sort of mergers and acquisitions. That puts aside the people who just don't make it. That's a reality as well. But 90%, it's an acquisition of some sort. Because that's a sign of maturity, I think it's interesting that we're mirroring each other in that, and you're starting to see contracting companies be acquired. The interesting thing that I never tied together before was, if you as a contracting company have determined what that goal is, what your core competency is, and what you're great at, you actually might be a great addition to another company to help them. That might actually make you more palatable for being acquired. I'm interested if that is something from that mindset, if you think companies should be thinking about it, or if I'm just off base on that one.
No, I think it is an interesting thread because I think increasingly contractors, we'll use that term broadly, are needing to think of themselves beyond boots on the ground, right? And so I think if we look at contractors more globally, then ultimately, a 3D printing company becomes a design build firm, right? And if I'm Hitt competing against a 3D printing company, what is the differentiation there for owners? Time, quality, all these different things. It's a new paradigm of thought. And so I think within that reality, a contracting business that has started to think about experience and the role technology plays in productizing that experience, that's a huge asset beyond the verticals that it's working in, beyond the supply chain relationships it has. And so I think there to your point, there becomes a few more different tentacles to the value of a general contracting business or a contracting business than just revenue, people, and maybe some of the traditional metrics.
Oh, I agree with you. We're seeing it in the mechanical and electrical space right now, in my opinion. You have some of those large mechanicals that have become more of a manufacturing company, and in the end may look at their boots on the ground as a liability, something that isn't core to their competency, and they may stop and allow others to do that part and then grow the manufacturing portion of what they do, and it may fulfill a need in a way that fits their core competency down the road. I think we're seeing that in electricals. We've always seen it in electricals, right? You have high voltage electricals that have lots of low voltage electrical that have acquired low voltage electrical contractors and made them part and parcel to the process, because that world has changed as well, right? Like, we had OAC Services on, and Chris and Sala were talking a lot about, hey, the handover of a building now is far different. It's not certification of occupancy. It's not our CO. It's like, can you book the rooms? Are our low voltage data systems fired up and running? Or else, hey, I'm not going to call it significant completion. I think you're dead on a lot of it. So, from that perspective, jump into your role today and say, like, okay, how do you, to use a Charlie Dunn, a former guest and friend as well, like, how do you teleport yourself into the future to learn things that you can bring back to today to work with Hitt?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we have a couple different kind of organizing methodologies. And one is we're looking to invest in initiatives that really will disrupt the industry and help us evolve. But that have a day one application. And so I think it's important to have something that grounds you, but also something that you aspire to. And so that is a general framework we use. And so whether it is looking at how a general contractor interacts with the design process in a more holistic way, we also want to look at that. Okay, well we have a new build here. How do we quickly get a day one application or some iteration of that into operations to learn and inform our aspiration, right? I think that's a framework we used often. But I think in terms of the original question, I think there has to also be a recognition, and I mentioned this before, but if I look 10 years ago, I was on a project in Council Bluffs, Iowa, building data centers, and I was using P6 and Excel, and I was using a lot of the tools that we still know today. And so we also have to be sensitive and cognizant of the fact that there are things that are going to keep us from evolving, and it doesn't need to impact our aspirations, but it should inform our plan, right? And trying to mitigate what we need to actually evolve into that future that we want. And I think I like to keep that in mind. And I think that having one foot in the operations side of the business helps really inform us learning from the past to inform how we need to evolve quicker going forward.
Awesome. And Ariel, I'm interested how that, through your lens, given where you are today, what that might spark for you.
I think it's very interesting. I'm going to take what you said. You need something that's grounding you, but then you also need that motivation that it's taking you far out. So I think that's great. We shouldn't lose our essence. And again, remember, we are part of the construction industry itself. Whatever solution we look for, we're looking how to become more efficient when it comes to construction overall. That's what we're trying to solve, right? So we shouldn't get distracted into too much technology if it's not necessarily adding value to all the stakeholders. So I love that. It's one of those things that I always try to share is maybe, if you don't have the resources to go out there and, do an acquisition or anything, what can you do that it's probably going to show not so far down the road, less than 3 years. So I love that, what you're saying.
One really quick way of kind of creating the future is consistently getting the basics right on each of the projects within your business, right? Like I think if we want to look at the future of construction, I've said this a couple of times, like I think it is getting the basics right. One of those basics, well, I think the basics, they will evolve to include other indicators of success, whether it be job site happiness or whether it is waste diversion and some element of sustainability. But I think it will be projects getting the basics right at a higher clip than they are today, whether it is from a scheduling standpoint, a quality standpoint, a safety standpoint. We know that has to be the future, right? We have a moral imperative to kind of drive towards that future. And I think from a labor shortage standpoint, we know we have to evolve to retain the talent that we have and create an industry that is attractive to new talent. And so I think that, creating that interesting thing that people flock to has got to be part of that future that we're trying to
have one for you right there. Let's talk about attracting talent. So as you know, with the newer generation, it's been said that the industry is not attractive enough. You actually, since you made the switch, how will you pitch our industry to a newer generation and see the potential that it has?
I mean, I think there's this narrative on Gen Zers that they want the cold brew and kombucha on tap and they want the comfort and all. And I think there's a portion of every demographic where a stereotype like that is probably true. But I think increasingly the folks who are in the digital almost all their day, they're looking for the tangible. And I think that's what this industry offers in abundance, is this connection between the physical and the digital in a really interesting and complex and complicated way. And so I think from an attracting talent standpoint, I think as long as we invest in the kind of infrastructure at the project level that holistically looks at the person's experience. We talk about experiences. We, in the same way that we do a journey map for a customer, we should do a journey map for our project team members and think about how we improve that. And so I think increasingly, as we're able to invest in the technologies and the materials and in the spaces that make that experience better, I think the people will come, because this is an industry that is fairly resilient. And so, we'll have our ups and downs, but they won't be in the same way that maybe other industries experience. And so there will be demand, and then it will be, can we keep that talent, and can we kind of evolve? But I think part of that too is transitioning folks from other industries, and thinking through what that even looks like. But there's a lot of different ways to go about that.
Yeah, I like that pathing, and I like your approach. I'll actually even challenge too that Gen Z, I think, is one of the most under thought through generations that we have coming, because to look at a generation, you have to look at what they've experienced and what they've lived through and when they've lived. And, there's some major things, this Gen Z is the first generation that really doesn't know life before 9/11. Just, they don't. Right. It's a very different frame for them. They have experienced the downturn. They have experienced other things and the growth of technology, et cetera. And we underestimate how resilient I think they are, but also since they've had those experiences, the way in which they act as a job and look at the job market and look at their career paths, it's significantly different than anything we've seen before. And that's relative to that experience. So I think they're actually primed for construction, especially because they care far more about the environment. I mean, if you think about post 9/11 and climate change, it's been dramatic, and it's been through their lens as they grow up, and they will force that into the future. Well, heck, that's a great opportunity. Where else can you affect? We are 40% of carbon emissions when you come to the built environment. What a great place to have an impact. But you better be impacting it, and you better be changing it, because that is the difference, is this generation will leave. They will leave you, and they will go find other places to go that are having an impact. And I think that relatively short cycle they're bringing us is the uniqueness of the future. It is why the built environment's a great place for them.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think to your point, I think it is not just about how do we fill our quota of people that we need in the business. It's also, to your point, like they can break the paradigms that all of us are in, right? In terms of mentally thinking through some of these problems that you have to come at it from a different angle for us to really make meaningful change at this point.
And they want to make meaningful change, and we actually have an opportunity to make meaningful change, right? We also have the opportunity. I mean, the rise of robotics is real. It's here. It's something we have to do. We can't, I used to say in a millennials talk a few years ago, was like, hey, look, you can't tell them we're technology enabled and show off the XR10 on somebody's head and an iPhone and a laptop and an iPad and this digital worker. And then when they actually come to your company, you're like, here's a clipboard, go walk around and write everything down on the punch list, and then get back into Excel, put it in Excel and email it to somebody. They're going to throw the book at you and leave. And I'm gonna throw a little plug out here. I've got a couple people on the hook that I want to bring in that are talking about taking risks on new robotics to attract that next group, because it looks like a PlayStation, controller when you come in. It is making them faster. It's making it more palatable. That's on us. But it, like you said, Stephen, I never even thought, like, they don't have our paradigm hold back. They don't have our anchors, right? They just have rockets. So let's enable them. I could go on for days. What I want to know from you, well, it looked like you had a comment there. So before I ask you the big final question, what were your thoughts?
Well, I was just going to say, I was at an ACM workshop a couple weeks ago, and we had a gentleman there talking about a couple different kind of themes of what he sees in the future, and one of them was teleconstruction, right? This idea of not having necessarily a project team per project, but some kind of hub system that manages projects using some element of robotics to fill certain functions. And again, fairly conceptual, but I think to your point, the folks that would do really well with this mixture of physical and digital are the ones that are doing it every day, and the ones who are on Xbox and PlayStation, and there is this merge, right? And I think they're naturally oriented to fill that role, and it'll be interesting to see what comes about from that.
And I'm going to spin that one down to Ariel, because if you think about the future of BIM, I think it's in gaming engines like Epic Games. And I think you're going to be modeling with a PlayStation or an Xbox controller. I don't know who the overlord's going to be by then, but you'll be playing with one of those. And Ariel, I wonder how that applies to BIM in your.
I agree 100%. And I think having a generation that is growing up with a 3D environment like natively, that's just the way they do things, makes it more simple. Just like Steve said, with like using an Xbox and PlayStation, I can see how new interns that we work with, they can navigate a model so easily. I had to spend so many hours training some folks on how to move around with an iPad, and this engineers, they just grab an iPad and they move around, or they take their mouse and they understand what a 3D navigation means. So I can see how that is going to just make it easier and easier. So
awesome. Well, and I want to spin that to you, Stephen. So you've got a unique view. You're doing a lot in the world. What's your biggest future take before we wrap her up? What are you looking forward to? What do you think's going to be? You get to be wrong too. Remember, this show has been wrong so many times. It's great. Like, blockchain is not a big deal yet, and we said, I don't know how many years ago it would be. So we get to be wrong. So you're allowed. Feel free to step into that trust tree and be wrong.
Jeff is going to hold you accountable, just so you know.
Thinking through. No, I'm not. I'm going to celebrate you and high five you someday that we were totally wrong.
We talking next 5 years, 10 years?
I'd say 5 to 10 years. I want to jump you ahead into your teleporter and go 5-10 years ahead.
Well, I mean, I think the basis of it, in my view, is really a paradigm shift in commercial contracts that leads to a really high trust environment on project sites, and that being the foundation. I think on top of that, I think you then look at a really unique integration of robotics that enables the empowerment of our craftsmen and folks that can then kind of scale themselves. We talk about scaling leaders, but I think the idea of scaling our journeymen and scaling our frontline workers could create a really interesting kind of additional resource. But outside of that, I think I've thought a bit about kind of the future of the GC and the role it plays. And I think the future I see is the GC becoming more of a marketplace of an owner coming to a GC for access to a supply chain in a unique way, whether it be you think Walmart versus Target versus Kmart versus Amazon. I think ultimately it's a decision of platforms, and those platforms enable certain behaviors, and so the role of a GC increasingly becomes less about putting up signage and yelling at people, and in an environment of trust, it becomes, how do you enable the right kind of collaboration? And so a GC that or a project team that is managing a project from a collaboration hub standpoint, it really changes the paradigms of a lot of those interactions. So I don't know, those are some of the things that I see, or some of the elements that I see happen.
I think there's some of the things we're starting to see the seeds of planted right now. And I think you're right. I think that next generation will benefit from that tree we're growing right now around that contract structure, around understanding the trust. I think just the fact that we're having the trust, I mean, previously, you think even when we talked 5 years ago, trust, transparency, accountability, none of those are all no words. We didn't really talk about those at all. So now we can at least start to have those conversations. And I think you're right. And the integration of robotics into our society as a whole is going to happen. It's already happening. So it's natural. It's going to happen in construction. So I appreciate it, man. This has been awesome. I think people are going to really love listening into you. And I think, taking you straight on into the news with us is going to be a good one too. So, hey, I wish we had more time, but it's time to wrap up and talk about the construction technology of the week. But before we do, and I'm back with Robert Shear, VP of Strategy and Business Development for OpenSpace. There's a lot of reality capture out there, a lot of 360 products out there. What really sets OpenSpace apart?
From the start, we really focused on speed and simplicity. If you want your field teams to use stuff, it better be easy, it better be fast. And so our focus is 100% on making life easier for people to build stuff. All our advanced tech is wrapped in a really super simple experience. It just works the first time, every time. And it works at the speed of construction, which to us means getting things turned around in less than an hour, so that if you walk at 7 a.m, by 8 o'clock, you can share that with your team and you can coordinate work and kind of track issues.
Awesome. Well, so who is really the OpenSpace product focused at? Are you looking at trade contractors, general contractors, owners? Who's your real, users?
Yeah, it's really all of the above. I think we started focusing on GCs, and I'd say that's probably most of our users. But now we've got real strong adoption with trades. A lot of owners are writing it right into the spec for the project. With the GCs, it's a lot of capturing maybe every other day, once a week, to really provide that context for the team. Trades tend to use them a lot more actively. They're using them to track progress, track team productivity. And then owners, again, love to have that sort of oversight and visibility into the project. We've got 100,000 active users on the platform. We've got our users have captured over 10 billion square feet in over 70 countries. And more of our customers are moving from using OpenSpace on 1 or 2 projects to really using it across their whole project portfolio.
That's awesome. Where can they learn more about OpenSpace?
Yeah, I'd point them to 2 places. One is openspace.ai. Check it out, look around. If you want to learn more, there's request a demo buttons all over the place. Click that. The other one is we're going to be at a ton of trade shows and conferences, both sort of national ones like AU and Groundbreak, but also regional ones. So if you go to openspace.ai/events, you can see a calendar and, stop by and say hi.
All right, we're back. Ariel, what do you have for us?
All right, so
today?
we have probably, discussed this, but it's really interesting to get Stephen's perspectives here, because we have this news saying construction technology funding holds steady at nearly $5.4 billion. According to a report by Mexico-based ConTech venture capital firm Cemex Ventures, our industry showed resilience in the face of adverse economic conditions across the world, as investments during 2022 held steady at around $5.38 billion, just under the $5.4 billion from 2021. Over 80% of the investments were made in North America and Europe, and the United States had 97 startups, which accounts for 42.5% of all the ConTech investment dollars that flowed. Despite the financial issues plaguing the economy around the world, Cemex Ventures predicts that in 2023, ConTech investment will continue to hold steady, with an expectation that the economic issues will begin to abate and provide a path forward at the end of the year. This report highlighted 4 areas of investment, which are enhanced productivity, future of construction such as AI and robotics, green construction, and construction supply chain. So, Stephen, what do you think about this, and what is your favorite field out of all the investments that you see?
Yeah, I think it's generally a really positive thing. From an R&D standpoint, there's a lot of ideas and initiatives that don't yet have products that we know will help us move the needle. There's also a con side, which is I think at times we get oversaturated in specific sectors, whether it be field management technologies or PM softwares or AR, VR or reality capture. There's a lot of money heading into these very easy to understand type of applications, and at times other sectors get ignored, right? And so that's one of the cons of when a lot of money comes into a new vertical. But I think what I'm, specifically interested in, I love when the non-sexy problems get funded, and whether it be something that is helping someone at the boots on the ground level, but better enable them or create an efficiency, or looking at whether we're talking specs, right? Specs are still written in Word, delivered to project teams in PDFs, and we know they're on average wrong. And so
Don't say that to Mark.
there's a couple there's a couple interesting companies out there, but I am interested. I'm glad there's money coming into the space.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to jump in on this one. I let Ariel bring this one in, even though we have, for our regular listeners, we've talked about the CMEX side of things, but given this different lens with having Stephen here, I did want to talk about it. I find it interesting too that you talked about that, non-attractive area to go after, that really pushes industry forward. I think we far too often look at parts of that and don't chase it. So my other take on this one is we're starting to see the reframing of getting around and looking at green construction, looking at funding and disrupting our own supply chain and understanding it. And that's going to, again, be part of a maturity of the industry to capture and understand your supply chain and actually change your supply chain completely. Foundationally, it's going to have to change. It's why you're seeing manufacturing come back into our country through robotics. It's not like we're bringing factories back and putting a whole bunch of people in those factories. It's not the old steel mills or anything like that. It's modern, new EV battery facilities. It's going to be chip facilities. Those are going to be run with robotics, which are going to really attract a whole new group of workforces. So to me, that's why I wanted to bring it back in and have this, continued discussion. The other thing is, look, layoffs happened again. So in between the last time we covered it and this time, you're seeing another huge set of layoffs. And one of the things that I think was really interesting about what CMEX was saying is, hey, look, it's going to happen, right? We're going to have a bit of a checkup. And we kind of need it. Let's be honest, like inflation and things are out of hand. So, some putting the brakes on and normalizing some things are there, but it's not all doom and gloom, and it is a cycle. And, quite frankly, Stephen, you wouldn't be thinking about 10 years ahead if you thought the cliff was coming in 12 months, right? So.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, to your point, I think it's a unique industry in that there still are so many problems to solve, that when we look at those problems through the lens of technology and available software, you can create something that creates a really large ROI. And obviously that's one of the components of why the money's coming in. So yeah, you're right.
Well, and to your point of the event you went to, and then I was at recently at the AEC Integration Summit, where we're really looking at foundationally shifting the experience that technology provides. And I think it will be an experience economy moving forward, where we have to look at, where should people be working and how should they be working, and how can technology, robotics, and the industry itself foster a path to that so we can continue to build those facilities. We can't fix our supply chain if we can't build the buildings that we need to run the factories, to produce the new drugs, to fund the laboratories and build the laboratories in which these fantastic new innovations that keep our world moving forward come from. Right? We got, and quite frankly, housing. We've got to continue to and get better at affordable housing across the country, especially as rise of remote work. You talked about this earlier, Stephen, when you talk about, extending the life of your project managers and you're remotely managing projects. That means they're going to move to new places. They're not moving into cities and dealing with traffic. We got to put houses there. And if we put houses there, when we've got to put restaurants there and retail there and things they can get. I mean, sure, Amazon can just open up its thing and deliver, but people still want the experience of a restaurant and go there. And those kinds of secondary and tertiary economies that this fills, and nobody gets to have those if we don't build it. That's the kind of the key.
Yeah, spot on. And I think one of the maybe scars of my past is always kind of starting kind of with the problem in mind. And I think as we look at the pro of this kind of money is obvious. We talked about there's so many projects that have really interesting conceptual solutions. I think the challenge is going to be, how do we take all of these ideas and solutions and concepts, and how do we ensure that we are testing them to build the right thing, right? And I think this is where construction tech, I think, is getting a lot better at not building a full platform and then going to market and seeing how it does, but building something that is small and concise that you can learn. And I think we need to take that same kind of approach to all of our initiatives, whether it be additive manufacturing, whether it be all the different things, robotics, and look at what does day one value look like for these concepts, and see how we iterate towards the future that we want.
Yeah, I like it. Starting small, building bigger, and supporting that and understanding it is critical to how you successfully build. But focusing on, and I think you've said it so many times, the experience. And we are really moving into a full experience economy. It's shifting. And you're right. Like, we are seeing manufacturers or mechanicals and electricals and even sheet metal turn into fabricators, right? Which is the first step towards being a manufacturer. It's not full bore, but hey, that's progressing on towards it. And you're going to see that in other areas, especially like you said, with modular. We're seeing this with, bathroom pods and enclosures and those kinds of things. We're actually seeing it in drywall and framing as well, which people don't believe is out there, but it is. So you're right. Start small. And that's how we, chunk this thing off. I think it was Wyatt Jenkins last year who said, everybody talks about a moonshot and I want to build a ladder to the moon. And that really brought it home to me, is that these organizations and these, but it's a two-way street too, right? Like, you as a contractor need to continue to articulate, continue to work with technology to make sure we're amplifying and moving towards that moonshot step by step, and providing something that delivers now, but can deliver into the future. So that's awesome. Ariel,
yes,
what do you got
I
next
have
for us,
another
man?
report here. This one is coming from the Dodge Construction Network. And he talks about labor shortage, inflation frustrating civil contractors, but optimism remains. So it says the federal infrastructure funding is rolling out more slowly than expected. Inflation is cutting into public works budget, and skilled labor shortages are resulting in lost work. Nonetheless, civil contractors and engineers are positive about the industry outlook. I'm going to provide a couple highlights from the report, and I'm going to call this the good, the better, and the ugly. So we'll start with the ugly. Finding skilled workers is a persistent problem in the construction industry. We know this, but they have some numbers here. And of the civil contractors surveyed, 72% said that they're struggling to hire skilled workers. Since the second quarter of the 2021, that number has hovered around 70%. Now, the good news will be that construction, slow to adopt tech, but the use of BIM and digital twins is growing. Dodge found that 78% of the civil engineers use BIM. That's up from 66% in 2020. And those percentages are lower among civil contractors, which 60% of them don't use any BIM at all. Now, the biggest quote that I got here is saying, contractors are very driven by what the owners are looking for. So if this takes off with the owners, then we're going to see more and more digital deliveries. Now, the best news here is that this report, for the first time, is doing a deep dive into mental health. And the report found that 53% of large civil contractors are providing some resources for mental health. And of those, only 19% are addressing mental health issues as a priority. I'm saying it's the best news because, again, we're getting reports and numbers out of this. However, the numbers are not necessarily the best.
Yes. Few goods, few
it's
bads,
up and down.
few uglies.
It's all over the place. So, Stephen, what do you think about all this? We got, again, we talked about labor shortages. We got the BIM news, and then also the mental health. Pick one and just go for it. We'll leave the other one for Jeff.
I mean, I think BIM and digital twins gaining popularity, it makes sense, right? It's a no-brainer. I think the digital twin side of that, I'd be curious about what that actually means in terms of how they're using it and what it actually looks like. But I think we know that the way in which we create the right platform for all these technologies to really integrate well into the project is through a digital reality, which is BIM and digital twins. I think it's an encouraging trend. I'm curious to see some of the value prop from a civil or from an infrastructure standpoint, and why more owners aren't driving that up. But yeah, that's interesting.
For me, I'd grab that one and say, Stephen, I think you're in that world, you're not going to get the owners that are pushing it in that way, shape, or form. And I think that's going to have to go back on to contractors of like, how can I gain efficiencies and gain market share and do more accurately with less people what I need to do so that I can do the things that require people to do that more. And that's the piece. The other one is, I think all three of them come together really well, or at least the top two come together to push the bottom one, is that, at least we're starting to measure. That's why we have the pause for the cause here at the show. That's why we're going to be bringing those resources to bear, but it's also going to be, if you're listening in and you don't think that your mental health and awareness programs and your employee assistance programs need to go beyond some sort of phone number, or something you put in a PDF that you give them at the day they sign their deal, and it's not something you're actually built into, you're not going to have the workforce. You're not going to win. And I think this is an opportunity for organizations to look at mental health and awareness as a critical path to hiring and standing out from their competition. So in my opinion, you take those two and you flip them on their head, and we can talk about digital twins all you want, but it's a data twin to me. And from that, there's far more you can do with the data twin than you can some digital representation of something. So to me, that's where that one goes. So I'm going to roll us on, because I'm going to talk about the one that everybody's talking about. If you are watching Twitter, if you're watching LinkedIn, it doesn't matter where you're watching right now. And this is from USA Today. So the Microsoft Bing AI chatbot having disturbing conversations with users, explained. So if you guys have been watching, there's an article floating around right now on the New York Times, and I have a rarity of sharing anything on the New York Times because, well, you have to pay to get in there. So it's Bing's chatbot left me deeply unsettled, the New York Times PDF. And this was a deep dive. So for those of you who don't know, ChatGPT is the engine behind Bing, Microsoft's Bing search engine, changing over into an AI chatbot because Microsoft invested $10 billion in ChatGPT. And ChatGPT is now valued, at least the last time I checked, at $28 billion. Microsoft is now invested $10 billion. They will be getting the profits, or I think it's like 7% of all profits, until they get their $10 billion back. So we're about to see this thing become some sort of monetized solution. So you're not just going to be able to create your BIM wraps anymore, for all of my BIM wrappers out there that are using ChatGPT to do those kind of things right now. And what Microsoft's done with Bing is they've opened it up to a number of different testers that have been doing this for a while. And one of the testers brought the chatbot down a real dark path and got some very interesting results from, it falling in love with him and wanting him to leave his wife and et cetera, and trying to convince him. And it's been obviously creating an uproar. What I wanted to talk about is that, listen, this is part of why Microsoft is training it. It's also some of the reasons why they're not our overlords yet. They're not sentient, and they're not going to get there for quite a while. However, they're going to feel that way. And what I think Bing's creating is the first ever digital assistant for the internet, right? Like, you're going to be able to go to Bing and ask it real questions, kind of like a mashup between Google and Ask Jeeves, if you remember it. And it will be your help, your personal planner. You'll be able to work on research projects for work. You'll be able to book travel. You'll be able to do all these things and go down a path where the AI will understand you in certain ways. But it has to be trained, and it has to go down some dark paths before it gets there. So it's pretty cool. I'm wondering, Ariel, what's your thoughts on ChatGPT and Bing's usage right now?
I mean, I like it. I think there's a lot of potential there. I think again, we're exposed to something that's new. We're learning how to use it, and it has to be tweaked, and some parameters have to be set for certain things. But I'm not gonna focus on the negatives. I just think that there's so much we can do here, and again, Microsoft is obviously gonna be keeping an eye on this because that's a big investment, and they obviously want to make sure that this doesn't fall. So. That's what I have to say. It's $10 billion, man.
That's $10 billion. Stephen, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think it was some professor that I think recently talked about or described ChatGPT as a really expensive copyright infringer.
Oh, yeah.
An interesting way to describe it. I mean, I think you can't help but have some element of your response be terrified, right? We've all been a little bit programmed to see this be the beginning stages of a robotic takeover. And I think, Ariel, to your point, like the benefits are numerous. I think the ways in which it'll impact everything we're just starting to peek at that, right? Like I looked at my 2 and 5 year old last night after using ChatGPT to write a short essay on. I was putting together a presentation on agile methodology, and I wanted to see how it responded to a prompt about collaboration and the history of, and it was really good, right? And obviously it's a thing because that's true. But like when you look at a 2-year-old and you're like, your professional reality in 10, 15 years is going to be very different than mine. It's a little bit, it's interesting.
It's a little bit of the overlord. You got to have we should step very carefully into it. And movies aren't the future. However, there's an opportunity for these things to go really off the rails, and it'll be interesting to see. But also, and I've had this conversation on a couple of, text channels as well, that like all new technology, especially one like this that's so different and powerful, people think it's going to take over, but it's really about us figuring out how we use it. And I think you're right. I mean, the copyright infringement thing is coming. I mean, I think I said this in an earlier one. I got letters from school now for my kiddos that like, we're going to look that you didn't do this through ChatGPT, right? And because you can. And so there's still that world is starting to flex and flip. But I think there'll be something to how you learn to harness the power of AI to help inform you to do good things for your company, for your person, whether it's, just, hey, look, kayak.com has been gathering up all the other places and giving you the best deals. Like, ChatGPT understanding where you want to go, what experiences you want to have from that perspective, and then helping you book that and plan that in a way that you wouldn't have thought of. There's an interesting use case for that. Hey, if I want to help my business get somewhere and I'm not really sure about the path, and asking how you can gather other information and giving me that, well, then I'm not against that. So everything can be used for good or used for evil. It'll be up to Microsoft, which scares me a little bit, to control some of it, but hey, that's all right. We'll just keep watching this one. We'll keep posting things that scare you. If you are looking at that, please go look up that New York Times article. If you're not out of your freebies,
you'll need it.
That one will freak you. And get some popcorn. That one will freak you out.
I mean, if you think about it, there's been some interesting longitudinal studies on the impacts of just phones on our brain development, right? Of just how we've kind of outsourced our brain, and how our brain is now really being used for different things. And arguably that different thing is the structuring of language. And now we have something that does that better potentially than us. And so the future of brain development, at what point will it be very worrisome of what that looks like is a question that comes to mind.
I agree. And I had a teacher who, I was like, why do I need to learn this? I got a calculator to do it. Well, you won't have a calculator in your pocket when you're sitting at the grocery store. And I'm like, oh yeah, I got a whole freaking computer now.
Exactly.
So yes, you're right. It's a paradigm shift. And, we're this close to being a robot as it is, because we have the world at our fingertips around that thing anyway. So you're right. But also we got to watch it. I'm going to switch us here. And this I read, and it's really, I'm going to read a little bit about it and give everybody an introduction to it. But it's also an homage to a good friend of mine that I had a chance to see recently. So it's how a theater background helps set the stage for a career in construction. Bullion Andrews, Dana Erdman, embraces technology as well as diversity in her dual roles at the Chicago-based construction firm. So this is all about Dana Erdman having a career in theater and drawn to stage management and playwriting, but then ended up over here in construction because she wanted to work for a contractor. And managed production is a lot like managing any other project in any industry. She said, you have actors that know their lines and folks that need extra help. You have deadlines and an audience to win over. And at the end of the show, you always hope for a standing ovation. You have to deliver. This sounds very, very familiar to my good friend, Nicole Carter, who came out of the stage and set and lighting world and made it over here into construction and has made a fantastic career. And I think it shows that, you know, not only does bringing people in with a diverse background from a different industry that can see themselves and see their path in our industry is a great way to cross bring people over. What I think is interesting about Dana is not only is she now the director of technology and innovation, but also our diversity and inclusion officer, which means her responsibilities run the gamut and they run across the company, and they're really transforming the company itself. She's overseeing not only their committees that they're doing, but they're looking at it. And, you know, she's really offering a way for us to articulate and show people make it in this industry from other places. And that's something we need to highlight. So I thought this is a great opportunity to highlight her and highlight my good friend, Nicole Carter. So I'm interested, you know, Stephen, as you look at folks, as Hitt looks at folks and going out and recruiting and filling the gap, what are some of the unique areas, theater, others that might interest you or interest the organization to recruit people?
Yeah, that is fascinating because I think there is so much power, like we've talked about, with having less of a specialist view at times, and I think that certainly highlights that. I think you know, we have a really strong recruiting department, and I think they're getting pretty creative around where they look. Specifically in terms of what other industries they're looking at, I don't know, but I think it would, in a modern economy, there are a lot of tie-ins between industries in terms of how you can apply the skill sets that you've gained, right? And so I think it would be too myopic for us to think that's not true. And I think there is a narrative that we need to overcome there, which is, you know, this candidate isn't industry oriented enough. We talk about that a lot on the construction tech side because we want to get that domain expertise, and I think there's something to that. But I think on the contracting side, we also need to maybe open our minds a little bit. But at the end of the day, for a number of roles in construction, there's a baseline level of expertise and experience that you need. But I think, like this story kind of highlights, there's a lot of roles where you can use and leverage your past experience in a diverse way, which is cool.
Well,
yeah, I like it.
I'm
Ariel?
just looking for her on LinkedIn, and I see we have a couple ConTech crew co-hosts that have a connection with her. So you never know. I mean, that might be a very interesting conversation to have with her. This topic is definitely good, man. It's definitely good.
Well, hey, Dana, if you're listening, and Nicole, I'd be happy to have both of you come on the show. And that's something I've been teasing out here recently. And we had one win with Urban Machine recently when they came on, thanks to them hearing us. So if you guys are listening in, come on and let's talk about it. I'll even ditch a co-host and bring the two of you on to have a full conversation around that transformation, because I think it's important. And I think her final statement in all of this is, what advice would you give to young women considering construction as a career? Representation matters. We need you. We do need you. I'm saying that with her. And the construction industry is changing, and diverse voices will keep moving it forward. And so we need you. But that also requires that we all make the shift as well and start changing the way we look at the workforce that's coming in and how we approach them. So with that, I want to thank you guys for joining me today. It's been a really fun episode. Stephen, I was hoping it would be like this, and it was, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Yeah, that was fun. Jeff, thank you. Ariel, nice to meet you, and thank you.
Hey, and good luck out there. Keep us apprised of what's going on. Hopefully we see you in person somewhere soon down the road. Ariel, man, it's great to have you on that microphone, man. It's great to have you back in the seat for a little bit. So hopefully we'll get a few more of these episodes recorded with you, man.
Looking forward to that. Have a good one.
Thank you for tuning in today to Geek Out for our interview with Stephen Poppe. To read all our news stories, to learn more about our guests, and to listen to this show, visit thecontechcrew.com. This is the ConTech Crew signing out. Until next time, enjoy the ride and geek out.